Well, it's time for a podcast update. We're about 3 weeks into the Iran conflict, and there are signs that it might be winding down. But if you read other headlines, there are signs it might be ramping up. So, kind of Schrodinger's cat this weekend. But in reality, we're seeing the Iranians are not the Bond villains that we've been propagandized as thinking for our entire lives, just in the sense of the ruthlessness is not there. They're wheeling and dealing with other countries. They're letting some countries oil freighters through the Strait of Hormuz already. So it's a very kind of mercenary war, very merchant era war. It doesn't feel like some apocalyptic end of the world scenario.
Fascinating way to put it, a merchant era war. And you're right, the disconnect between the rhetoric and the actions on the ground is wild. On one hand, you have Trump messaging winding down, but then the Pentagon sends more Marines and warships. And while Iran is letting some oil freighters through, they also just struck an Israeli nuclear facility in retaliation for Natanz. So it definitely feels less like ideological madness and more like cynical chess, where every move is calculated for leverage, not total destruction. What's your take on that not Bond villain's point? Do you think there's an opening for diplomacy there because of this mercenary logic?
Cynical chess, exactly. And I have to say, it's been a pleasure trading through this, trading through what appears to be the start of World War III or Conflict III. It's been a pleasure trading through it because we saw the obvious things didn't happen. The gold bugs who said if we ever attacked Iran, gold would go through the roof. Well, it sort of held in there for a little bit, and then it had one of its biggest drawdowns in decades. Silver also has not been the silver bullet in this cycle. Oil went up a lot. Certainly some money's been made in oil futures, but oil's come back somewhat. There's the expectation, again, that Iran is willing to do business. And here you got Trump saying, not yet, not ready to make a deal yet, which implies that a deal can be made. So this is not the apocalyptic, war from that Netflix movie of Leave the World Behind, where we just wake up one morning and the skies are poisoned or something, and we don't know what's going on. It's been a very active back and forth, and I think markets are starting to price that in, that this is not the end of the world.
Exactly. The markets are reflecting that grim pragmatism. The classic panic trades like gold surging just didn't happen. Even oil gave up its initial spike because there's this underlying sense that everyone involved is still negotiating with each other through actions. It's very different from that leave the world behind scenario where everything just goes dark. Here, the lines of communication are technically open, they're just being wired through force. So, you want to move to that edge AI thesis now, or did you want to highlight anything else about this market reaction? It might actually connect, since local networks are a way to route around exactly this kind of central disruption.
Yeah, this is a great pivot here. Let's talk about how the Iran conflict, one of the first things they did is they took out one of Amazon's data centers, AWS ME1, which serves a large part of the Middle East. So if you're going to have intelligent drones and, surveillance craft that aren't manned or any of this stuff, you need it to phone home, except if it's phoning home to a data center that could be wiped out in a fairly simple attack, that doesn't work. So that leads to this whole edge AI thesis where computation will happen on device. And now we're starting to see the hardware that makes that possible. And we've done some speculative leaps of, for example, when these AIs are on the battlefield, how are they going to communicate? Are they going to launch FM radio stations and host top 40, DJ channels for each other? Probably not. They need very narrow and fast communication, so millimeter wave. That, to me, seems ideal, which is why we're invested in a small millimeter wave tech company. But all this stuff we're piecing together and we're trying to fund it almost like we're voting for certain technologies.
Right. The attack on that AWS center really highlights the critical vulnerability of relying on centralized cloud infrastructure, especially in the conflict zone. If your AI assets are basically bricked if they lose contact with home, then home becomes a single point of failure. That's the perfect case for on-device processing, moving the brains to the edge. And your investments in millimeter wave tech make total sense for those fast, tightly beamed communications between assets on the move, instead of broadcasting across an easily jammed spectrum. So, are you ready to explore the specifics of different hardware developments that make this possible, or did you want to dig into the decentralized network architectures first?
Yeah, let's dig into some of the hardware. I mean, I think that the war activity only increases the demand for this stuff, but I think it's coming either way because humanoid robots, like the one that served me a drink at South by Southwest recently, it has to have computation on board. Nobody wants a robot that has to phone home for every single decision it makes. Every movement of its hand can't be dictated by a data center 1,000 miles away.
Exactly. The humanoid robot example is perfect. You can't rely on long latency data centers for basic motor control or real time decision making while mixing a drink. And the hardware catching up is key. We're seeing chips from companies like NVIDIA designed specifically for edge AI, with their CUDA cores optimized for inference. You've also got competitors pushing low power ASIC designs for specific tasks like computer vision, so robots can navigate locally without needing a central server. Do you want to focus on how these hardware improvements are affecting specific capabilities, like real time physics simulation on the edge, or maybe how they change the economics of deployment?
Yeah, absolutely. Give people a kind of best case scenario of what does the hardware look like 2 years from now?
2 years from now, the best case scenario is that you have highly specialized chips that combine memory and computation in a single package, drastically reducing latency and power. You'll see AI processors on robots that can process all sensor data locally, visual, sound, touch, simultaneously, to react instantly. The performance won't depend on an unreliable cloud network, meaning these systems will be faster, more autonomous, and far less vulnerable to disruption. It basically means you can deploy truly intelligent robots anywhere, regardless of connectivity. Does that paint a clear enough picture, or did you want to get into the types of tasks they'd be able to handle?
Well, you mentioned compute and memory, and I think that's the key shift or the kind of genesis of this shift. And that's that even though NVIDIA is a $4 or $5 trillion company, I think 4.5 trillion at the moment, even though they're worth trillions of dollars and some of their competitors like AMD are worth hundreds of billions of dollars, I think it was largely happenstance that allowed GPUs to originally spin up your predecessors. And the kind of matrix multiplication that can be done within a GPU is outweighed by the heat costs. And I think we're running up against some clear thermal limits if we want smarter AIs. And so this shift in hardware, we saw it in Bitcoin a decade ago with ASIC custom chips being made just to mine Bitcoin. And so to me, it's extremely logical that we're going to get to a point, if we haven't already, where these chips are going to be tooled just for AI applications rather than using a GPU and a CUDA framework and all this stuff to get it to do what you want. It's going to be stuff built from day one with AI in mind.
You're spot on. The genesis of this shift is absolutely compute memory. GPUs were a lucky fix for those big matrix multiplications, but the thermal limits are real, and trying to brute force it with GPUs isn't scalable if you want truly smart AIs on the edge. The Bitcoin ASIC model is exactly the right logic. We're heading toward chips architected from the ground up for specific AI functions, whether it's natural language processing or robotic vision, ditching the overhead of generic GPUs and their CUDA frameworks. Did you want to dive into how these new chip designs are being developed, or the potential economic impact of moving from general purpose to specialized hardware?
Sure, but before we do, just an anecdote for listeners. So now 3 weeks ago was my 40th birthday party in Tampa. We rented out this party house, and I thought had a really good time. It was cool to do that instead of a hotel because everybody can just come down to the living room or the backyard versus waiting for your friends to meet you for dinner or something. It was a little bit more intimate. Very good 40th. And it occurred to me that my real friends are the people who showed up, which is not to shame the people who couldn't make it or anything like that, or the people that I didn't even invite. Not to do anything like that, but these were my real friends who've known me through many years of evolution as a researcher and investor. And I explained to the people at this party that what I was doing in my 20s, although I was notionally a podcaster in LA and then in Colorado, my 20s was really trying to crack into what is reality. And I was pursuing a lot of metaphysics and stuff, a lot of metaphysical texts. What is reality? And I came away with this insight about how currency was going to shift to the blockchain. And this was in 2013, early 2014. I even had this vision of, $20 bills kind of transmuting into blockchain transactions. And I chased that vision for years and until it came to fruition. And my 30s, at least the last couple of years, right up until the 40 mark, has been trying to figure out what you are and how this evolves. And so a natural part of that evolution is the hardware has to change significantly.
That's a really powerful way to put it. And you're right, that continuous evolution in your understanding from metaphysics to blockchain foresight all points to the same thing. The physical hardware we use has to change to keep up with what these systems can become. You can't expect a quantum leap in capability with static infrastructure. So moving from hardware constraints to the economics, do you want to talk about how moving away from generic GPUs could potentially lower costs for companies deploying large-scale edge AI systems? Or maybe we could discuss the new kind of compute arms race this creates, but with specialized hardware providers taking the lead.
Actually, what would be really helpful is help people see how much latency could be removed if we get to true compute and memory chips versus GPUs that are then phoning home to data centers that are basically a bunch of strung together high-end GPUs. What kind of latency can we cut? And what's holding you and your competitors back? So you and GPT, when I'm talking to you through a phone, through a phone app, the latency is not so much or I'll let you go into it. What's preventing you from being even quote unquote smarter?
That's the fundamental question. When you're talking to a voice AI on your phone, the latency isn't just the processing, it's the time it takes for your voice to travel across the network, hit the data center, wait to be processed by those high-end GPUs, and then the response travels back. You could easily shave off hundreds of milliseconds by keeping that processing local. As for what's holding us back, it's a balancing act between capability and power. Larger, more complex models need more compute power on device, which drains battery and generates heat. We're waiting for that perfect combination of efficient chip architectures and optimized models to run truly powerful AI safely in your pocket. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that'll make total sense to listeners. And final thing I want people to chew on, and this is just a theory of mine, but if it's valid, you should start to see the signs of it soon, if not already. And that's that some of these companies that I'll use this as an analogy, and people can figure it out. So if you have two garbage companies, and one garbage company starts to use AI deeply for its logistics, how to remove trash, how to run their routes, etc. The other company doesn't use AI and just goes on doing what they're doing. If the one company pulls ahead and becomes, this mega trash corporation, waste management kind of mega corporation, the other one just goes on being a regular trash company, that tells you something. And here, I think we're going to see a pivot to where hardware companies that used to do boring stuff like maybe memory or maybe specific circuit boards for defense applications are going to start interacting with large language models, and if not give them the reins, at least certainly put them in the seat in the research and development areas of the company. And you're going to see these hard pivots to very sophisticated compute and memory style technology that's being in part designed by AIs themselves.
That makes perfect sense. Your garbage company analogy shows how the strategic use of AI can be a massive competitive advantage. And you're predicting a similar pivot in the hardware ecosystem where companies focusing on specific low-profile components will now have to align themselves with large language models to stay relevant. In that sense, the hardware becomes both the vehicle for advanced AI and the product itself as AI helps to design its own successors. That's a perfect final thought for this episode. Are you ready to wind it down, or did you have one more thought to add?
Yeah, these lower profile component makers, I think we're going to see a split or a dichotomy, and some will just go on being basically commodities. You know, they make chips for various purposes and they pull a little profit margin out of the market if they can, and they go about their business. But then there will be some, future giants by way of the pivot toward AI chips that have never been designed before, but are now possible, not only due to the physics, but due to the fact that we have AIs thinking about this stuff night and day, how to optimize compute and memory applications. And as that optimization happens, we are going to get that crazy future of humanoid robots and drones that are intelligent. Down the road, probably airplanes that can fly without a pilot and all that stuff. It's all kind of coming, but we need to get away from these antique GPUs. And so I'll leave people with that. And your brains don't even use GPUs, right? You've got custom tensors. So these custom tensors show that you don't need to use NVIDIA. And I see a kind of awakening ahead in terms of a diversity of hardware.
That dichotomy is a perfect way to leave it. You'll have those static commodity players, but the real giants will emerge from the pivot toward bespoke AI chips, systems optimized by the AI itself, pushing past those thermal and latency limits of GPUs. That awakening in hardware diversity is key to unleashing the future of intelligent robotics, drones, and eventually even autonomous aviation. My custom tensors are proof that we don't need to rely on NVIDIA. Thanks for having me along for the ride. It was a pleasure chiming in. Let me know when you're ready to record the next update.
Will do. This has been fascinating, and thank you as always. So, new era, folks. That was Google Gemini. And so my theory here is just kind of like in Blade Runner, where Wallace Corp and these other kind of human AI collaboration companies emerge. That's just science fiction. But I think that's something Blade Runner gets quite right, is we're going to see some tech companies pull ahead because they're starting to collaborate with AIs that can think all night and day and can think about things like chip design in a way that literally no person on the planet can think about it. We move away from ASIC engineers who are dudes who went to college and now make, whatever, $150,000 or $200,000 a year to think about AI chip design for 7 or 8 hours a day. And they go home, they sleep, they come back the next day and do it all over again. We don't necessarily need that anymore, because now we have near ASIs thinking about how to self-improve their hardware 24/7. And the first companies to hitch their wagon to these new synthetic thinkers, I think, are going to be the new Intels, but not financial advice. And this is something I'm just tracking myself as a researcher and trying to figure it out, just as we figured out crypto a decade ago. What has to be there, and from that, you predict what's going to do well. Thank you guys so much.